その夜、トムとシドはいつものように寝る準備をしていた。しかし、トムは眠れなかった。静かな夜に耳を澄ませると、部屋中に不気味な音が聞こえてきた。時計のカチカチ、古い階段の音、そして幽霊めいた気配が漂う。やがて、トムは窓から外へと逃げ出し、ハックルベリーフィンと共に墓地へと向かう。墓地で彼らが目撃する出来事とは？
That night, at 9:30, Tom and Sid were sent to bed as usual. They said their prayers, and Sid quickly fell asleep. However, Tom was too restless to sleep. He lay there waiting, feeling the night drag on. He thought it was almost morning when he heard the clock strike 10, which made him feel hopeless. He wanted to move around but stayed still to avoid waking Sid. The room was very quiet. Soon, small noises became noticeable. He heard the clock ticking, old beams creaking, and the stairs making faint noises. It seemed like ghosts were all around. From Aunt Polly's room came a muffled snoring sound. Then he heard a cricket's chirping and a creepy ticking sound from the wall near his bed, which made him think of death. A dog howled in the distance, answered by another faint howl. Tom felt trapped in time, as if everything had stopped. He tried to sleep, but kept hearing sounds. Suddenly, he was startled by a loud "Scat! You devil!" and the noise of a bottle crashing. This noise fully woke him up. Within a minute, he got dressed, climbed out the window, and sneaked across the roof. He was careful, meowing quietly a couple of times to stay stealthy. Then he jumped down to the ground. Huckleberry Finn was there waiting with his dead cat. The two boys then quietly moved into the dark. After half an hour, they were walking through the tall grass of the graveyard, disappearing into the night. The graveyard was old and typical of the Western style. It was located on a hill about a mile and a half away from the village. It was surrounded by a wobbly wooden fence that leaned in some places and out in others, but never stood straight. The cemetery was overrun with tall grass and weeds. The old graves had sunken over time, and there were no tombstones. Instead, there were old, round-topped boards that were worm-eaten and tilted as if they were trying to find support but couldn't. These boards once had "Sacred to the memory of" so-and-so painted on them, but now they were so worn that you couldn't read most of them, even if it had been light enough to see. A soft wind blew through the trees, making Tom nervous because he thought it might be the spirits of the dead, upset by their presence. The boys spoke little, and only whispered because the solemnity and silence of the place weighed on them. They reached the fresh grave they were looking for, and hid within a group of 3 large elm trees near the grave. They sat quietly for a long time, with only the distant hooting of an owl breaking the silence. Tom felt uneasy with the heavy quiet and decided to start a conversation. "Hucky, do you think the dead people like us being here?" he whispered. Huckleberry whispered back, "I wish I knew. It feels really serious, doesn't it?" "I think it does." Tom agreed. The boys were quiet for a while as they thought about what Tom had said. Then Tom whispered, "Hey, Hucky, do you think Hoss Williams can hear us talking?" "Of course he can." "Well, his spirit can," Huckleberry answered. Tom, after a pause, said, "I wish I'd called him Mr. Williams. I didn't mean to be disrespectful. Everyone just calls him Hoss. We shouldn't be too careful how we talk about those who have passed away, Tom." Huckleberry replied. This made them both quiet again. Suddenly, Tom grabbed Huckleberry's arm and whispered urgently, "Shoo! What is it, Tom?" Huckleberry whispered back, and both boys held each other, their hearts pounding. "Shoo! There it is again! Did you hear that? Aye there! You heard it now. Tom, they're coming! They really are. What do we do now? I don't know. Can they see us? Oh, Tom, they can see in the dark like cats. I wish I hadn't come here. Don't be scared. I don't think they'll bother us. We're not doing anything wrong. If we stay very still, maybe they won't even notice us. I'll try, Tom, but I'm really scared. Listen. The boys leaned close together, barely breathing. They could hear muffled voices coming from the other end of the graveyard. Look! Over there! Tom whispered. What's that? It's some kind of ghost light. Oh, Tom, this is really scary. They saw some shapes moving through the dark, carrying an old-fashioned lantern that sprinkled little lights on the ground. Huckleberry whispered, trembling, It's got to be ghosts. 3 of them. Tom, we're in big trouble. Can you pray? I'll try, but don't be scared. They won't hurt us. Now I lay me down to sleep. What's wrong, Huck? They're people. One of them sounds like old Muff Potter. No way, really? I'm sure of it. Stay quiet. He won't notice us. He's probably drunk like he usually is, that old mess. Okay, I'll keep still. Now they seem lost. Here they come again. Now they're getting closer. Now they're moving away. Now closer again. They're right this time. Hey, Huck, I recognize another voice. It's Injun Joe. That's the one, the awful half-breed. I'd rather deal with real ghosts. What are they doing here? Their whisper stopped because the 3 men had reached the grave and were just a few feet away from where the boys were hiding. Here it is, said a third voice, and the man holding the lantern lifted it up to show the face of young Dr. Robinson. Potter and Injun Joe were carrying a hand barrow with a rope and a couple of shovels on it. They set down their load and started digging up the grave. The doctor placed the lantern at the head of the grave and sat down with his back against one of the elm trees, so close the boys could almost touch him. Hurry, men, he whispered. The moon might come out any moment. The men grumbled and continued to dig. The only sound was the shovels moving dirt and rocks. It was repetitive. Then, suddenly, a shovel hit the coffin with a soft thud. Within a few minutes, they had lifted it out of the ground. They opened the coffin with their shovels, pulled out the body, and placed it roughly on the ground. The moon came out from behind clouds and showed the pale face of the corpse. They prepared the barrow, placed the body on it, covered it with a blanket, and tied it down. Potter then cut the extra rope with a big knife and said, Now it's ready, Sawbones, and you'll pay another 5, or it stays here. That's right, said Injun Joe. What do you mean by this? Asked the doctor. You wanted your payment in advance, and I paid you. Yes, and you did more than that, Injun Joe said, stepping closer to the doctor, who was now standing. 5 years ago, you kicked me out of your father's kitchen when I asked for food, and you said I was up to no good, and when I swore I'd get even with you, no matter how long it took, your father had me jailed for being a vagrant. Did you think I'd forget? I have Injun blood in me, and now I've got you, and you need to pay up. Injun Joe was threatening the doctor, fist raised in anger. Suddenly, the doctor punched, knocking Injun Joe to the ground. Potter dropped his knife, shouting, Hey, don't hit my friend. He then tackled the doctor, and they struggled intensely, stomping on the grass. Injun Joe quickly got up, his eyes wild, grabbed Potter's knife, and moved stealthily around the fighting men, looking for a chance. Suddenly, the doctor broke free, grabbed a heavy wooden headboard, and knocked Potter down with it. At that moment, Injun Joe saw his opportunity and stabbed the doctor in the chest. The doctor fell, bleeding heavily on Potter. Right then, clouds covered the moon again, hiding the horrible scene, and the terrified boys ran away into the darkness. When the moon came out again, Injun Joe stood over the two bodies, thinking about what he had done. The doctor made a few sounds and then stopped moving. Injun Joe said quietly to himself, "That settles that problem. Goodbye." He then took things from the doctor's pockets. After that, he placed the knife in Potter's hand, who was still unconscious, and sat down on the broken coffin. A few minutes passed, then Potter started to move and groan. He looked at the knife in his hand, felt scared, and dropped it. He then pushed the doctor's body away, sat up, and looked around confused. When he saw Injun Joe, he was shocked. "What happened, Joe?" he asked. "It's a mess," Joe replied, not moving. "Why did you do it?" "I didn't do it." "That excuse won't work." Potter was very scared. "I thought I was sober. I shouldn't have drunk tonight. I'm still confused. I can't remember much. Please tell me, Joe, honestly, did I do this?" "I didn't mean to, Joe." "How did it happen?" "You two were fighting. He hit you with the headboard and you fell. Then you got up, still dizzy, grabbed the knife and stabbed him just as he hit you again. And then you fell down here." "I didn't know what I was doing. I swear I didn't mean to do it. It was the whiskey and the shock, I guess. I've never used a weapon before. I've fought, but never with weapons. They all know that. Joe, you won't tell, will you? I've always been good to you, remember? Please don't tell." "No, Muff Potter, you've been fair to me, and I won't betray you. That's as much as any man can promise." "Oh, Joe, you're a lifesaver. I'll never forget this." "That's enough crying now. We need to get moving. You go that way, and I'll go this way. Make sure you don't leave any tracks." Potter ran off quickly. Injun Joe watched him go and thought, "If he's as confused from the hit and drunk as he seems, he won't remember the knife until he's too far to dare to come back for it alone. What a coward." Soon, only the moon looked over the scene, the quiet body, the open coffin, and the unattended grave. Everything was silent again.